Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Steve, it is a pleasure to have you back on the show. It is nice to see you again. I don't think it's been that long. It's been like 6 months, 7 months.
I think it's been about 6 or 7 months, Robbie. Lovely to see you too. You're looking well. And I don't know, one of these days I'm going to be the most popular guest on Out of the Blank podcast. It must be getting close, surely.
You're already top in my heart, I should say, top in my heart. I have to ask because obviously I have an interest in ancient history, but I've been more focused into more relevant topics. But through all your podcast on Spartan history, I mean, do you feel like not that you have a better understanding or do you have a better overall image of ancient Sparta, or just maybe some things that aren't depicted that maybe the public doesn't know about? I mean, we've talked about it in previous episodes, but I feel like you probably come up with your own morals and themes based on the type of research and episodes that your content focuses on.
Yeah, man. As always, you ask fantastic questions. I love that about you. But and I think you probably found this yourself when you were getting into podcasting. Like, you have an idea about where you're going to go and where the journey is going to take you. And it's only when you sort of start getting into the actual subject matter itself, as you probably found out with JFK. I've been a big fan of some of your episodes there, that you sort of start understanding, probably what your true purpose was in doing that. And in answer to your question, yeah, absolutely. So much so that I think before I started, really drilling down into especially the Bronze Age myths, the Homeric myths of ancient Greece and Sparta more generally, you start seeing that there's this thread that sort of weaves its way between all the stories, and you can start picking out different generations of history, if you like. You can start understanding that, something happened at this particular time, and then you can start following that through its sort of evolution within the ancient history, within the myths itself. Before you know it, you really start to grasp elements of it, and it all starts making it more sense all of a sudden. Whereas before, it's just this broad section of ancient history, myth, legend, hearsay, oral poetry, and it's just a lot of stuff. But then once you start, trying to write narrative in behind it, you realize that there is a story there, and once you start grasping that story, I think you can deliver a better product to your listeners, and it becomes more coherent in your mind. Yeah, so I can give you an example. So there's roughly 6 generations of mythic history. The second last one is probably the most well known, which is the Iliad, the 10-year war around Troy, and the last generation are all the children of the people that were at Troy. So like Orestes, who was a son of Agamemnon, Telemachus, who was a son of Odysseus. That's the last generation before an event happened within ancient Greece that's not just testified through oral history, it's also testified in the archaeological record, whereby the sons of Heracles, the Heraclidae, returned to Greece after a period of banishment, and basically wiped out Mycenaean culture. And that's borne out by the burnt archaeological record that you see in places like Mycenae and ancient Sparta. But that generational sort of talk stretches back 6 generations prior to that point in time, which is really that period of time that encompasses all of the Homeric legends within there. So before I really got into podcasting, it just was all, little pish posh here and there and everywhere. But once you start drilling into it, you realize, oh my God, there's a coherent narrative in there. And that was probably one of the most surprising things that happened to me.
Do you think there was a focus on eliminating the other person's footprint if one civilization was taken over, not leaving it alive for historical record purposes, but focusing on making sure that it was never discovered in the first place? I mean, it might be a weird question, but I mean, waging war, you don't see a whole lot of people gathering materials that aren't useful to their own society to build them up. You see a lot of destroying and a lot of getting rid of. That's why we're finding stuff now, like Viking sites in the UK that's not really talked about a whole lot, but the Vikings just disappeared. But then you're finding remnants of things, and it's just wasn't really focused on. I mean, a lot of it was destroying, getting rid of, and making sure there was no remembrance of that other party.
Yeah. There's a really clean line of demarcation between, we'll call it Bronze Age Greece, which is the Mycenaean period, and I guess Iron Age Greece, which is when we sort of come into a more, rather than orally tested, a literally tested Greece. And there's a period of about 300-400 years there. So you're sort of looking, if you were to put it in real world terms, you're looking at about 1200 BCE would be the fall of Troy and the collapse of Mycenaean culture. And there's a period of what they call the Dark Ages of Greek history, which takes about 400 to 500 years. And it's dark, not in the fact that there was no sunlight. It was dark.
They had no
Intellectually.
candles.
Yeah, they were just the sons of Heracles. They burned all the candles, and they lived in the night. No, there was no knowledge. There was no written record. So the Mycenaeans had their own script, which lo and behold became Linear B, which was translated in the 1950s by a guy named Michael Ventris. So they had ability to communicate, and it wasn't until around Homer's time, which was in sort of 7th to 8th century, that the Phoenician alphabet was adapted into the Greek alphabet. And then they started writing again. So there's about a period of 400 or 500 years there where there just is absolutely no written record whatsoever. And to be fair, the written record, starts with Homer and another epic poet called Hesiod. But prior to that, the writing of the Mycenaeans, there was no epics in that. There was no stories. It was all, how many chickens this guy had, how much tribute do we pay to these guys? This envoy wants, a couple of bags of gold or whatever. So that's sort of the demarcation between that. So what happened to destroy the Mycenaean civilization wasn't so much that it was intentional to get rid of the writing, to get rid of the understanding of the culture that came before. It was just the people that came in and burnt these palaces to the ground had no writing of their own, and they destroyed basically the culture that came before, and then settled over the lands. And of course, the surviving Mycenaean people, joined and merged with those cultures, and then eventually, after things settled down, after a period of a couple of hundred years, Greek culture started to burgeon once more. And the ancient Greek sort of history that we know from 7th to 6th century onwards, the Greco-Persian Wars and the like, came after that period.
Can you find anything through your research that has been attributed either from the Spartans or to the Spartans that might not necessarily be theirs, or the opposite, like someone that might have taken something of the Spartans and we just attribute it to the longest time to them, but it was really something that came later or from someone else?
I'll answer that in a slightly sort of cryptic way, in that what we call the Spartan mirage. Yeah. So there's a thing that historians, it was coined by a French historian in the 19th century called Le Spartan mirage, or something like that in French anyway. It was basically the idea of Sparta. And this is what, I have a lot of trouble with this with my listeners. People see the Spartan History Podcast and they're like, yeah, can I swear on your podcast? Don't remember.
We've done it so many times already.
Have we? Yeah, it's like, fuck yeah, Sparta. They're like, they want to see the 300 from Frank Miller's comics, and that's the Sparta that they think of. So, in answer to your question, yeah, that idea of Sparta is very pervasive, and it wasn't just people that weren't Spartan that thought like that. It was also the image that the Spartans themselves promoted to give themselves a reputation throughout Greece. So I always like to think, people ask me, I think you asked me the first time we ever spoke about the movie 300. I like that because I think that's how the ancient peoples would have thought about Sparta, and it's how the Spartans themselves would have liked themselves to be perceived by other Greeks. Can you imagine it? Like, this is who we are. This is what we want you to think we are, and people are going to think we're badasses. So we can just stay in our little, peninsula in the Peloponnese down there and have our slaves, our helots, work our fields, and people are going to leave us alone because they think we're badasses. Now, to be fair, they had some pretty epic moments on the battlefield, which fed into that idea, that mirage of the Spartans. But I think that's probably the main thing that that wasn't really Spartan, but it's something that we all associate with Sparta, and rightfully so. And I also suggest that the Spartans themselves would have bought into that idea a great deal themselves.
Why do you think they chose Hercules as, like, call themselves the children of Hercules or the sons of Hercules? Why wouldn't they choose, like, maybe Ares, the god of war, or something that has more of a demonic, or not demonic, but more of a, if you're talking about being a war culture, you would choose the god of war as your, main essence. I'm pretty sure Hercules is the god of strength, if I'm not mistaken, but I guess it's the 12 labor challenges.
Yeah. Well, Hercules. So the words hero, or a hero, as we would call it today. So Hercules was a demigod, and in those days, so getting back to the generations I was talking about, Troy, Hercules comes from a generation before Troy. So he wasn't actually at the Battle of Troy, but he had previously single-handedly conquered Troy 20, 30 years before, or whatever, according to the Hercules legend. So I mean, for a warlike people like the Spartans were, there could probably nobody better to associate themselves with than Hercules. Now, the ancient Greeks tended to associate as their founding their founding heroes were always sort of half man, half god. You know, the Athenians had Theseus, the Thebans had not Orestes, they had oh my god, I'm blanking on the guy's name now. Anyway, they all had their own different heroes. So for the Spartans, Hercules came from the area nearby to where they were. He was Doric, which the Spartans were as well. And if you look back through the Spartan record of kings, the first 10 to 12 kings on either side of their kingly line, they had two kingly houses, so they had two kings, were direct descendants of Heraclides or sons of Heracles. So I think it was just it was a good image for them. Heracles was a local hero to that area, so he would have been well understood by the general populace. And it definitely, even like Leonidas, for example, the king that fought and died at Thermopylae was a Heraclides. He was a descendant of one of the houses of Hercules, and he was an Argead king, and there was a Eurypontid throne as well, so two different thrones, and both of those thrones could stretch their descent straight back to Heracles in the historical record, or so they say.
Now, is there a significant war besides like the one that gets depicted in 300 where everyone basically dies? I feel like that's not, 300 is a good movie. I'm not going to lie about it. I'm pretty sure it was 298 that went to battle. But if you really like want to give a good depiction of like a good Spartan movie, what would you say the most significant war in your mind and your research from what you've done has been something that you've learned? Obviously people just see the 300 movie and that's their education on Spartans, but from the historical record, or for what you can tell, what was a significant war that might not get talked about?
301, sorry to correct you, 301 Spartans, because they always talk about the 300, but then they're like, what about the king? So there was 301 shit. Spartans.
I thought it was 298.
Two of them. No, well, you could probably say 298. 299 died, so two actually survived, and they have interesting histories after Thermopylae. But probably their finest hour, or albeit their finest 15 minutes, probably occurred at a battle that took place a year later than Thermopylae. Thermopylae was sort of the opening land salvo to the second phase of the Greco-Persian Wars, which began in 490 BCE with the Battle of Marathon. So the Persians got their asses handed to them by the Athenians there. So 10 years later, the Battle of Thermopylae. A year later after that, 479, the Battle of Plataea. So post Thermopylae, in September of 480, there was a battle called of Salamis, which was a naval battle. Now, the Athenians were the premier naval power at that time, but even that being the case, there was still the Spartan navarch or naval commander that was commanding that fleet, but it was a massive Greek victory on water, which gave Xerxes enough reason to run back home to Persia and leave Greece, because the navy was his lifeline. That's how they got supplies from Turkey or from the Persian Empire into Greece. So without a navy to back them up, Xerxes hightailed and left. But Mardonius was his kinsman and his most prominent general, and he also featured in the earlier phases of the war 10 years before too. But he stuck behind with an army of, say, around 200,000, maybe as high as 300,000. It's hard to say. Now, battles or wars were never won on the water. The same can be said today. The ultimate battle has to occur on land, and it was at Plataea, which is in Euboea. In southern, just south of Thebes, so north of Athens, a little place called Plataea, where the Spartan-led Greek allied army of maybe around 40 to 50,000 hoplites, fully armored Greeks, came to grips with the Persian army. And it took about 10 days for them to sort of, figure out that they were going to fight. They were very scared. The Persian had far superior numbers of cavalry. But in those 20 minutes, the Spartans threw down and absolutely wiped the floor with the Persians. If you've ever seen the second 300 movie, I'm forgetting what its name is now. At the end of 300. That's the one. Sorry, yeah. So that's more about the Battle of Salamis. If you look at the end of 300, the guy that's narrating the entire movie, they're charging at a bunch of Persians right at the end of that movie. That's actually the Battle of Plataea. That was the definitive land battle of the war. We don't really get a lot of casualties from Herodotus, who's the primary historical source. He doesn't really tell us a great deal about how many Spartans died, how many Greeks died, how many Persians died, but it was an overwhelming victory for the Greeks, and it was a Spartan-led military force. They'd basically depopulated their entire region of soldiers. They had 10,000 hoplites, which was so 5,000 homoioi, which were fully blood Spartans, 5,000 perioikoi, who were sort of the second class citizen. And Herodotus tells us that for every Spartan homoioi, there was also 7 helots, which were their slaves, their indentured servants.
The ones with the agricultural experience and knowledge, right?
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So you're looking at 45,000 potential fighting men just from the city of Sparta. The Athenians had about 10,000 hoplites. Corinth had about 4,000. So there was a bit of a conglomerate polyglot force. But the Spartans were the tip of the spear. The regent Pausanias, who had taken over the regency of the Argead throne in lieu of Leonidas' death. His son was still too young to inherit the throne. Utterly defeated the Persians. And that was really the end of the Greco-Persian wars on Greek soil. It continued for about 30 years, largely led by the Athenians after that. But that was the last time the Persians ever went, oh, let's go and add Greece as one of our provinces. So much so that 150 years later, Alexander the Great stuck it to the Persians and conquered the entirety of the Persian Empire. So that was it for the Persians. So that's the greatest battle in my mind that the Spartans ever took part in.
What was the purpose of the anger, I guess, towards the Persians, or the Persians' anger towards everybody else? Were they just interested in conquering just like Sparta was, or was it just something more on the long? When did they even come into the picture? Yeah,
good question. The Persian Empire was actually fairly nascent, even in 490, 480 BCE. Prior to that, so Darius was the king that sent the expedition to Marathon in 490. He died in the mid 480s, and Xerxes, who was, he wasn't the eldest son, but he was the eldest son born after Darius became the Persian king. So he, through stabbing a few of his older brothers and typical royal machinations.
Politics.
Yeah, that's how they roll. So, so prior to Darius, there was Cambyses, who added Babylon Babylon to the Persian Empire. And prior to that was Cyrus the Great. And it was only in 552 BC that Cyrus the Great managed to flip the paradigm on the former Median Empire, and made it a Persian Empire. So the Persians were pretty new, but they were expansionist. Cyrus was a conqueror. Cambyses was a conqueror. Darius was also a conqueror. And Xerxes was simply looking to do exactly the same thing, was looking to, live up to the ideas of his father and his grandfather before them. So, really Greece was a fly, on the back of the mighty Persian Empire. But the Greeks, they were the ones that really started it off. So the Greeks also lived in what we call Asia Minor, which was the western part of Turkey. They'd been conquered by the Persians very late in the 6th century, towards the back end of the 500s. And, they had a respect for freedom, they had a respect for not so much democracy, but more, civil-led society, rather than bending the knee to a Persian potentate. So they called for some help from mainland Greece, and the Athenians sent over an expedition, and they caused the Persians a little bit of hassle. They burnt Sardis, which was the capital of the Persian satrapy in the western part of Turkey, and that really pissed the Persians off. So, Darius is like, we're going to go get you guys. So they sent the expedition to Marathon, which went to Euboea, the island, and burnt one of the cities there that also participated. So they burnt that city to the ground. They deported the male population from the island all the way out to Iraq. So, they showed those guys what for. Then they went to Athens to serve them up, and they were managed. They were defeated by some pretty stunning Athenian hoplite tactics there. So that was basically it. Darius had planned to come back, but he died. So then when Xerxes came to the throne in the late 480s, he's like, I've got to fulfill my dad's wishes here. I've got to, punish these Greeks. So that's where it really all stemmed from. It was a bit of tit for tat, a little bit of payback, and also the Spartans played a part in this in the mid 490s under Cleomenes, who was a very powerful king of the Spartans, ruled from about 520 to 490 BCE. He was attacking Athens, looking to, basically get rid of it. They had some very early democratic leanings, not good for the Spartans. The Spartans hated democracy. They liked an oligarchy or an aristocracy. So they were like, we're going to get rid of these Athenians. They're causing trouble. And the Athenians actually reached out to Persia, and they the Athenians offered earth and water to Persia. So technically, Athens actually belonged to the Persian Empire. So when the Persians came to collect, the Athenians reneged on their promises as the Spartan issue had gone away from them. So that's really where it all kind of started. A lot of political machinations, a little bit of ticking off the Persian Empire and trying to save face.
I mean, through looking at it all, do you base it on reputation? Do you base it on human instinct? All this compassion for war and drive to kind of conquer? I mean, everywhere you hear it's burning stuff down. So I'm wondering if this is just motive, means, religious ideologies, anything that comes into the picture. I mean, what have you picked up theme-wise that you can tell through a prevalence of all this time period?
Yeah. It's, theme is the right word to use there when you're referring to the Greco-Persian Wars, primarily because Herodotus, who was the historian, he was very Homeric in the way that he wrote his history, and for him it really was a thematic conflict between, I guess, the barbarians, which was the Greek term for anybody who didn't speak Greek, by the fact that they sounded like they were saying bar, 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 bar. So barbarians come from that. And the civilized and the cultured Greek West. Now, Herodotus came from Halicarnassus, which was a city in southwestern Turkey. And actually, Artemisia is one of the characters in the movie. She was queen of Halicarnassus. So a Greek queen or a Carian queen, fighting on the side of the Persians. But for Herodotus, it was very much a case of the barbarian East against the civilized West. Of course, Persia was very civilized and in many ways far superior culturally to the Greeks. But the Greeks just had this belief in their culture. They had a shared identity with their pantheon of gods and their shared language. And for them, it really was even historians in this day and age, they get lost in the hyperbole of it all. But the Greco-Persian Wars, to most historians, prior to the current woke era that we live in, where we can't celebrate Western civilization, the Greco-Persian Wars was and is the birth cry of Western civilization. If Persia had have crushed the Greeks during those conflicts, there's no telling where they would have stopped, and they wouldn't have stopped. There was nowhere further east to go, really, not easily, but there was west. And in 490, Rome had been a republic for 16 years by that stage. There was no way in the world, and they were a city. They weren't an empire. They had a city with maybe a couple of settlements around the city. There was no power in Italy to stop Persia, and nor was there that sort of homogeneity of culture that the Greeks had, where they could come together and beat back the masses that Persia. Persia was a truly continental empire that they could throw at the Greeks. The Greeks could come together for that one beautiful period in history with a navy and a land army that could stop them. So when they say the birth cry of Western civilization, I agree. I think the world today would be a far different place if the Persians had defeated the Greeks there. So thematically, it was civilization versus destiny.
I mean, when it comes to, if you look at like the Persians, how did they get so massive? Like, how were they able? It seems like a lot of the Greeks, a lot of their tactics and strategies were a reason why they were up to last and really kind of beat back the Persians in a sense. Because it seems like from what you're explaining, there's like a massive amount of the Persian army compared to the forces of the Greeks.
Yeah, look, by far and away. It's topography had a lot to do with it, especially in the land side of things. Greece's mainland and the islands, for that matter, are almost 90% mountains. Very, very few places of plains where, if you look at the Persian Empire, the homeland, and we're talking around, Mesopotamia, Eastern Turkey, those sorts of areas, Saudi Arabia down to those parts, Egypt, lots of plains, lots of areas that lend themselves to, massive infantry charges, bulk cavalry units, chariots, those sorts of things. Whereas Greece was a series of mountains with tiny valleys between the mountains and mountain passes linking the valleys between the mountains. So therefore, a serried rank of 1,000, 2,000, 4,000 hoplites, who had trained and drilled together on how to be a veritable wall of shield and spear, could upset massive amounts of enemy soldiers. Which we saw that at Thermopylae. You're looking at maybe 7,000 Greeks in total, led by 301 Spartans, held off an army that was several 100,000 at that stage and held them off for 3 days. And it wasn't until that pass was turned that they were defeated. Who knows how long they could have lasted in the face of the adversity there. And the same can be said for the Battle of Plataea, which was the deciding battle we just spoke of. Very hilly battlefield, very hard to deploy, massed ranks of infantry, very hard to get accurate cavalry charges, because, if you can imagine a battle with lots of hills, a real three-dimensional battlefield, that the cavalry could charge off this way and thinking, the troops are over there. But once they got around the back of a hill, they couldn't see where they were going. Whereas this, long lines of spears pointing at the enemies, once they came to grips with the Persians in close combat, and this happened at Marathon as well in 490, there was really nothing the Persians could do. It was the equivalent of, the first arrival of tanks on World War I battlefields against, say, people on horses with spears still. The Greeks had a technological advantage. And in answer to your question, how the Persians got large so fast, it was over those series of kings. They had a pretty good power structure from the Median Empire that came before the Medes. I mean, they were still largely called the Medes. Herodotus calls them Medes for the most part, as many times as he calls them Persians. And through a series of conquests, through empires that weren't really at the peak of their game, when they took over the Egyptians, days had passed, the Babylonians' days had passed. Most of the empires that they were taking over really couldn't come to grips with Persia. But the Greeks, due to the topography and the way that their land and that their army had been set up, had an advantage against them there. And they also had a navy that could compete with, some of the best navies of the day, the Egyptian and the Phoenician navies. It's a funny story, mate. Like, to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, I've always been amazed at how the Spartans, who started developing around about 700, this little land-based empire in the Peloponnese, managed to come up with the right ingredient to defeat the Persians 200 years later at the land battles of the Greco-Persian Wars. And the Athenians, through other means and other reasons, developed a navy that could, defeat the Persian navy, and they came together almost exactly the right time to deliver that, that 1-2 punch, the Spartans by land, the Athenians by sea, to defeat the Persians. It's a truly miraculous occurrence. And, as I was saying before, without those two things happening, who knows where the Persians would have stopped? The Italians could be speaking a Persian dialect in this day and age, for all I know. Who knows?
I mean, it puts a new equivalent into, like, numbers aren't everything. I mean, if you look at the size of the Persian army compared to the tactics of the Greeks, I mean, it's a little bit. I mean, when did Sparta exactly fall? Like, when was their final day where you don't really see a whole lot of Spartan? Either they assimilate or they were just wiped out.
I guess so. There was a massive civil war that went from about 431 to 402 BCE between the Peloponnesian League, which was the Spartan-led alliance, and the Delian League, which was a Athenian and primarily naval alliance, and throughout the Greek islands. And that battle lasted, a war, through fits and starts, lasted roughly 30 years. Now that really bled the strength of the southern Greek people, so the Athenians, the Spartans as well. Now the Spartans were ultimately victorious in that battle, but what that war did was it really, and the change had been happening for a while in Sparta, but it really fundamentally changed the Spartans as we know them. The austerity, the hate of luxury, the dedication to farm holding and to being warriors. And all of a sudden, all this affluence, all this money, all this luxury was coming into Sparta, and they'd lost a lot of people in that war. They were a very tight-knit oligarchy. Even before this time, there's a phrase that was coined by an ancient Greek historian called oliganthropia, which means
Good for you getting those.
Yeah, that was an easy one to say, actually. It basically means the dissolution, the dissolvement of the ruling class. So the Spartans were, it wasn't an equal society, even though their term for Spartans meant, the homoioi meant similars or equals, or peers, I guess. You had to have, as we've spoken before, you had to meet certain requirements to be one of those people. You had to have, land and be able to supply the correct amount of food to the communal dining halls, the syssitia that they had. And if you fell out of favour with that, you could never come back. So by the time they're at the end of the Peloponnesian War in 402, there was only really roughly about 1,000 homoioi left at that stage. So that's your full-blooded Spartans who wore the red cloaks, wore the long hair, shaved their moustaches, went through the agoge. There was none of that left anymore. And if you take that back to the Greco-Persian Wars, there was about 8,000 of them then. So we're looking at an eightfold decrease in full-blooded Spartan hoplite warriors, which is what really gave them their strength. So 30 years later, there was a battle at Leuctra against the Thebans, and the Thebans had their butts kicked by the Spartans for a number of years prior to that. And they'd learnt their lessons well under a couple of very dynamic leaders. They'd even developed a band called the Sacred Band, which were, ironically enough, 300 or 150 homosexual pairs of warriors, giving them 300 total. The mythology around the number 300 certainly wasn't lost on the Thebans, or the irony lost on the Spartans in that. And they defeated the Spartans wholesale at the Battle of Leuctra. A year after that, the Theban alliance actually captured Sparta and released their helots, their slaves, emancipated them, created a city for them called Megalopolis, or Great City. Once that happened, the Spartans ceased to be a fighting force from there. Now, they still had some attitude, but they were no longer a power in Greek politics. You found that the Spartans were joining alliances with other cities. So I guess the end point of my show, when I eventually get there, will be the Battle of Leuctra, because that's the end of Spartan history as a solo history. There's still history in Sparta, but it's not the Spartans the way it was before.
Do you think the release of the Heliots into Sparta was like a kind of like a slight or spit on them, as if you consider that those were slaves? I'm guessing that wasn't, they're making that whole place filled with slaves was kind of like an insult to the Spartans, considering that they were such a high power before.
Oh, mate, 100%. Slavery was nothing new to the Greeks. All of the Greeks had slaves, but having Greek slaves was something that was anathema to the Greek people, so much so that there was a massive earthquake in Sparta in the 460s, and there was a Helot revolt. So there was really two provinces to the homeland of Sparta. There was Laconia, which Sparta was the capital of, and there was Messenia, which is the southwestern portion. Now, the Spartans conquered Messenia in the 7th century, or say maybe the very late 8th century. They started their conquest over there. So there was actually two types of helots or helots. There was Laconian helots, who had been slaves for a very long time, and Messenian helots, who weren't Laconian, who weren't Spartan, but were nonetheless enslaved. Now, when this earthquake happened, it really rocked the Spartan city, and it really upset the way things were done. And the Spartans were in a lot of trouble. The Messenian helots immediately rose up in revolt, and the Spartan needed some help. So they reached out to the Athenians, because the Hellenic League, which was the alliance that was formed between the Greek cities when the Persians were coming over, was still in effect current. So they called in the Athenians. The Athenians got there, and they started helping the Spartans lay siege to the Messenian capital, Ithome, in Messenia. And they're like, what are we doing here? The Athenians by that stage were democratic, not in the way that we understand the word, but they were democratic. And they're thinking, why are we helping the Spartans enslave other Greeks? So it became a really big issue, and caused a rupture between Athens and Sparta that was never truly healed. So absolutely, when the Thebans after Leuctra went into Sparta and dissolved Spartan hegemony over the Helots and helped create them a city, it was a big middle finger to Sparta, full well knowing that the only reason the Spartans could dedicate themselves to war was because they had, for every one Spartan, 10 slaves working their fields, emancipating the Spartans effectively from field work so they could dedicate themselves to war. So the Thebans 100% knew what they were doing when they did that.
Now, how did they treat, because I was going to ask you this before, I think we mentioned this a little bit off air, but how did they treat people that could not be equipped for war? Spartans, like if you were elderly, what did they do with you? Did they make you attend to the fields with the rest of the slave population that they had? If you were a person that was either disabled or had some type of handicap, did you have to focus on building and sustaining and managing the village?
That's a good question. Well, Sparta was primarily a gerontocracy. Gerontocracy gives us our word for geriatric, as in gerontocracy ruled by the elderly. The Gerousia was one of the fundamental political bodies within Sparta, and the Gerousia means Council of Elders. So you needed to be 60 in order to join the Gerousia. So it's actually a body of 32. So the two kings were in there as
Damn,
well.
they had
and
that
could be
many old
whatever.
people back then. Holy crap! I'm thinking people died at like 20.
Well, if you look at like even like Ramesses the Great, one of the famous Egyptian pharaohs out of the probably the king that that the Jews are talking about in Exodus. I think he lived to be 96, killed by a toothache. So yeah, while it wasn't common, yeah. Oh mate, most people died from bad teeth back in those days. But yeah, so the Spartans actually had a deep and abiding respect for the elderly. In fact, there's a bench, like a park bench, that they found in Sparta with an inscription on it that says, if you're young, you should get up and let somebody else older than you sit down there. And there's a apothegm, which is the saying of Spartans that was recorded in a book called the Apothegmata Laconia, the sayings of Spartans, basically. And there's a Spartan who makes a quip that he doesn't like sitting down to go to the toilet because if an old person came by, he'd have trouble standing up in time to let him sit down. So they had a deep respect for the elderly. And in regards to infirmity, that's a tricky one. You know, obviously we hear stories about when a baby is born that it's inspected by the Ephorate, which is a board of 5 annually elected councilmen. I guess they were very powerful, especially in the 5th century. And if it had any deformity or any, signs of weakness, then they'd discard the baby by dropping it down a hole. Effectively, it was actually I forget the name in Greek now, but it basically means the place where you get dropped. Now they found a place like this not far from Sparta that they think it is, and they found a number of skeletons, quite a large number of skeletons at the bottom of it, but no babies. So they think maybe it was used for prisoners of war or something like that. But that's the legend, that babies were treated like that. But we look at one of the more prominent kings who fought during the Peloponnesian War, I mentioned there, and he was indeed still king of Sparta when the Spartans lost at Leuctra to the Thebans, Agesilaos. He had a deformity in his leg. I'm not quite sure what it was exactly, but we know that he had trouble dancing, he had trouble marching. Now, maybe he was left to be okay because he was one of the kings, but it's not exactly clear cut when it comes to disability within Sparta. And I go back to the Spartan Mirage there. You know, did they really get rid of all their babies that, showed signs of weakness or, had sort of slight deformities when they had a very tight-knit population as it was? Or was that just what they wanted people to think, that these guys are hardcore? They don't put up with any shit in Sparta. You show a sign of weakness, you get chucked down a hole. So it's really hard to say how it was for the normal people. But as far as the old age thing goes, the Spartans deeply respected their elders.
It's interesting because if you really bring it to a point, I mean, it would lead into speculation. But I mean, if you think of an army that tries to consider itself is effective, and everybody has to be to the best of their capability, then you would understand them getting rid of people with disabilities, nobody that could be fit to the cause, but they would get rid of. But also, like, what would they consider qualifications as a disability? I mean, can you tell if a baby has some type of autism when they're inspected? I mean, we can barely do that. I mean, we could do it now with technology, but it's not relatively an 100% accurate thing. And then what happens if someone's in war and they lose a limb? Does that mean that they have to be discarded as well too, or cast out? I mean, I had to think that there's definitely disabilities in ancient history. We just never really talked about it. Nobody ever bothered to write it down, but it brings into a really good question, which is, how much of the record is difficult to read because it does end up leading into speculation for things that you do not have answers for, that we do not have journals, we don't have letters, we don't have anything that's been written down. I would have to feel like there's a lot of historians out there that end up diving in and having minute details that are different. I mean, I'm doing that with the Kennedy stuff, and that's like not even that long ago, it's 60 years ago, but there's a lot of difference in opinion. So I'm wondering, with a record that is a lot of it's clouded, or a lot of it's missing, or a lot of it we just don't know, you end up having to try and piece things off the plausible information that you already do have, which makes it difficult if you're doing a historical podcast. It's just trying to give the accurate historic information while also trying to engage in your own intellectual conquest as well too.
Yeah, mate, absolutely. I mean, with the Spartans, what you say there, it's doubly true. The first 20 to 25 episodes of my show were based in a period where there was absolutely no written record contemporary contemporary Spartan written record of the period. We delve into things like ethnography, that whereby we compare other historical and contemporary cultures with what we believe the Spartans would like to try and understand. The way they were with the training of their youths, the pederasty, the pedophilic relationship between men and boys and things like that. But there is no written history by a Spartan at all. There's not a single one. Herodotus, as I mentioned, was Halicarnasson. He was, from southwestern Turkey. He was, writing about the deeds of the Spartans, but he likely never even went to Sparta. He might have met some Spartans for sure and spoken to them. And look, this is by and large the problem with most Greek history in general. It's Athenocentric, whereby it's written by people like Plato, Aristotle, Pericles, these types of Demosthenes, these types of people, and all the great playwrights. They all came out of Athens. So we have absolutely nothing. There was a prominent Athenian who was a student of Socrates, named Xenophon. He was an Athenian elite. He was the author of the Anabasis, the March of Country. So it's the March of the 10,000, whereby 10,000 Greek mercenaries tried to go and help a Persian prince overthrow the king. And when he got back to Athens, he was very disillusioned by the killing of, or the forced suicide of Socrates. So he actually left Athens and he lived in Sparta for a period of time from about 400 to around about 380. His children were made honorary citizens of Sparta. They went through the agoge, that's the ritualized education. And he writes about the Spartan political system in the early 4th century. But that's 100 years after Thermopylae. There was a famous historical speech that was given that the Spartans don't even remember their grandfathers. Like they had, they could read and write for the purpose of keeping records, but they weren't renowned for reading and writing. So there was really nothing, no record that they could get out there. So, mate, with Sparta, it's been very, very tough. It's been great to get into the more historical period because they can actually read, articles, text, documents, modern historical thought to be able to start piecing together a narrative. But before that, it's just all guesswork. The Spartans, for how popular and how prominent they are, there is absolutely nothing written down, minus some lines of epic poetry written by Tatius, who was a poet who lived in the 7th century and writes about battles, mythical battles in poetry. It doesn't really give you a great deal. There's really nothing, mate, to go off at all for what we feel the Spartans did in history. They barely leave a blip on the historical record.
What's interesting to me is that you've soaked up all this information through doing the podcast, but I'm wondering, you've probably noticed that there's areas with Spartan history or just Greek history in general that end up either intersecting or something comes across, but it's something that maybe you have a difference of opinion on. You know what the record is, or you know what this is, but it's also a controversial issue. It's like the JFK thing for me. Just don't even say who pulled the trigger. Just it's controversial. Don't even enter that territory because you get a host of answers. So I'm wondering, what's your difference in opinion maybe than a listener or someone that, maybe you've talked to on your show? I saw you did a couple interviews, but I'm just curious if you have a different opinion from maybe a source that you were looking at where you're like, well, I don't necessarily know if I agree with that one. I think it's probably more likely this. It doesn't have to be 100% true. I'm just curious what your perspective is on it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's all just a series of arguments, educated arguments, as far as modern historical perception goes of Sparta. And look, you could basically, or broadly, I should say, put those into two different camps. There was the camp of people who believe in Spartan exceptionalism, that, there was the Spartan mirage and, there was a lot of propaganda that was going on. And, people were looking, when people were writing about it in, say, the 1st or 2nd century CE, looking back with rose-colored glasses at the heroic age of the Spartans. And there's a bit of fluff around there, but by and large, there's a camp that believes that the Spartans truly were exceptional, that they were, warriors almost straight out of mythology, and they almost single-handedly saved Greece from destruction by the Persians. Then there's the other camp that doesn't really believe in Spartan exceptionalism at all. In fact, they just consider them, your everyday Greeks. They lean a little bit more left, as far as they consider them to be slaveholders, which they they were, without getting into too much nuance. And that there really wasn't anything that special about the Spartans, save that they were, great propagandists, and they pushed forward an image of themselves as being these sorts of legendary warriors. So I've disagreed with people on that side fairly regularly. My two favourite Spartan historians, both have been on the show. Paul Cartledge, and who's probably I'm a little bit biased, but he's probably the greatest living legend when it comes to Spartan historical research. He's good friends with another professor called Steve Hodkinson, and they couldn't be more polarly opposed in their viewpoints on Sparta. Somehow they still managed to be friends. I'm sure they've had some fantastic discussions. But look, I disagree with Professor Hodkinson's theory that the Spartans were just another, fairly average Greek polis that weren't that exceptional. I think that the Spartans were extremely exceptional, in good ways and bad ways, that they were different from really any other culture that had, come out of ancient Greece. They had systems of government, systems of operation, cultural differences that were really individual to their setting. Where they were in the Peloponnese, they're quite isolated, hard to get to. So they sort of developed a slightly different way to, how you'd see Athenians or Corinthians or Thebans. So yeah, that's really the fundamental basis of any argument that I've had. But that can get taken too far as well. As I mentioned before, the guys that are out there going, fuck yeah, Sparta, like they don't really like my show because I try to tell it straight down the middle. Obviously I've got my biases, but I try to tell the Spartan story as best as I can. I put in my own 2 cents, but I generally try to keep it pretty straight down the middle. So I end up just pissing off people on both sides, people who don't think the Spartans were exceptional and people who think that they were literal gods. I sort of fall in the middle a little bit, I guess.
You find that people's, like, if you're looking at an academics journal or academics perspective or professor's perspective, that they have you can notice their political bias being drawn into it. I noticed that with the Kennedy stuff. Like, nobody talks about the scandals, especially if most of the Kennedy people are left wing. They won't talk about the scandals and won't acknowledge it, but you end up missing a whole chunk of history. So if you play it down the middle, which is what I try and do too with the JFK stuff, you don't get, you piss off everybody, but I'm curious if you're reading somebody's source and you start noticing, okay, this person has this political, whether it's wokeism that has entered the ancient argument or historical record. And then also, what are your thoughts on the dangers of modern politics being intertwined with the teachings of ancient history, instead of just looking at it from what we can read from a textbook and factually prove this way? People's own ideas and beliefs being inserted into the historical record, changing the outcome of what is taught.
It's a massive problem, mate. It's a huge problem. I don't think that history is there for us to twist to our own political narrative. History should be, obviously there's massive lacuna or gaps in what we understand from the historical record, and that could be, if we're talking about the Romans or the Sumerians or the Greeks, but we should never try and twist what we do know to fit our current narrative. Like, I can tell you for a fact that the Spartans or the Romans or the Babylonians weren't imagining a time in 3,000 years where we'd be sitting here as so-called enlightened individuals, and they would be worried about how we would be perceiving them. They're doing what you and I are doing now. They're just acting out their lives as best they can. And I think that we do ourselves a disservice when we try and manipulate the history to try and support our own political biases, our own cultural biases, and our own narrative. And I think, you've probably noticed in America, and the same can be said for most of the Western world, how academia is extremely skewed towards the left. Tenured professors.
They won't admit it, though. They won't admit it. I've had them on and I've debated them about it. I said, look, it's the same thing with our media right now. Our media is a lot left. I'm apolitical. I don't care about politics. But I've noticed it where you see a complete overriding theme of one side over the other. And especially in academia, nobody talks about the Kennedy assassination in academia, or not even the Kennedy assassination. Nobody really focuses on Kennedy that much because of the fact it always leads to the question of the assassination. And if you talk about conspiracy, people assume that you're right wing. And it's like, it's just looking at the record and showing that our government has done a lot of bad shit. And to say that they just paused for whatever long the Kennedy thing happened, then no, that's just stupid. But nobody wants to, they skip right into Johnson. I mean, one of the biggest controversial issues, Vietnam War, was Kennedy going to pull out or not? A lot of leftist people think he'd like to. The right conservative people say that there's no evidence to support that. You're basing it off of claims that he experienced change while in office, which I do believe he experienced change. But also, I don't know, because it's the context of war. What's the country telling you need to do compared to what your own belief is going to be compared to that? And then you get into, like I said, the assassination. Is that why he was killed? Again, sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
No, but I mean, you're right. And I think, the left believes in, more government, more regulation, more control. That, where there's a need, there's a right, I guess. And if you're going to, go down the road of, say the JFK conspiracy, then that's a proof that more government is bad. And it tends to be, right-leaning people that would probably say, well, that's government doing what government always does, acting like a tyrant. So that you'll get to divide that. I can give you an example of, it's not, it's historical. It's not related to Sparta so much, but there was a big push to try and homosexualize Achilles and Patroclus in the Iliad. And, it got tied up with that whole, homophobia that, if you didn't accept gay rights, then, or actively promote it with, rainbow flags and things like that, then you were against it. It wasn't enough to accept it. You had to promote it. And there was a massive push in academia, and it's still there, to be fair, to say that Achilles and Patroclus were homosexual. Now, to be fair, in classical Greece, in the 5th century, the 4th century, 700 years after the Iliad, that was a fairly well accepted thought, that the Athenians certainly made a lot of references to Achilles being in a homosexual relationship with Patroclus, and fair enough. But the actual source material,
is that because he went to war as well too after one of them died? The other one, they like to think that that's why.
Achilles completely flipped his fucking lid after Patroclus died, and he tore shreds of himself, and slaughtered a bunch of Trojan POWs, and built a pyre to the sky, and he completely lost it.
But that was because he dressed up like the one guy and tried to impersonate him in battle. Is that, yeah? We talked about this
that's
before,
right.
I think.
Yeah. We would have talked about it before. Yeah. So there was, I got into a big argument with somebody saying, I just simply said, show me the source. Homer is our source for the Iliad, and for Achilles. There's really, no other primary source to him. I said, just show me where it says they're in a homosexual relationship. And it wasn't, well, although homosexuality was very accepted in classical Greece, and it was state sponsored like it was in Sparta. That's not my argument. I just said, show me where it says in the Iliad that they were romantically involved at all. And the only answer I got was, "Oh, you're a homophobe. You don't care about the plight of gay individuals." It's a typical tactic of people that go down that way, rather than meet you halfway and have a intellectual discussion about something. They just start calling you names because they don't really have any ace up their sleeve, so to speak. In that, but that happened very recently in academia. Achilles is gay. If you don't believe it, you're a homophobe. Not, you can't provide evidence of it. It's just, you're just a homophobe.
I wonder, I mean, with Homer being the kind of main source for everything, isn't that difficult? Because you're supposed to have two sources to really get a confirmation of anything. I mean, that's how news is supposed to handle. But if you got one guy writing your thing, I mean, I feel like he left some details out probably on a lot of things.
Yeah, well, CNN or NBC should probably adhere to that two-source rule. But, mate, when it comes to ancient Greece and really the ancient world, you take what you can get. If you've got one source like Homer, and he is, canonical, he's biblical in a sense. There's only one Bible, there's only one Homer. So if he says something that's later trumped by an author 300 or 400 years later, most people will default and say, well, Homer's closest to the source. We'll go with what he says. So, there's no chance of getting a second source. Oh, Homer said the battle lasted for 10 years at Troy. Well, we're fucking stuck with that. Like, there's nobody else that can say any differently, really.
No, I think your take on everything is pretty respectable, because I think you're open to new ideas and new information. But at the same time, I don't think you're like how I am. It's not the whole piece. Like, just because there was people with disabilities back in ancient history, and there was gay relationships back in ancient history doesn't mean it's the whole thing. It's not the whole entire theme of not every single person was that. It just means that there was a little bit of it and it wasn't acknowledged before. But people try and want to make it the whole thing, which eventually it just kind of skews a lot of the important information, which is the historical significance of what the thing is you're teaching.
Yeah, well, and to get back what you were saying about how people try and skew history to fit their narrative, that Achilles and Patroclus saga, that's what they're trying to do there. They're trying to support their beliefs and their ideals and their promotion of gay rights, gay pride, which is great. But there's other ways to do it. You don't need to skew a book that was written 2,800 years ago to make you feel better in your choice and your belief structure. It doesn't serve any purpose whatsoever but to occlude and obfuscate history as it is. And look, it's patchy enough in and of itself. We don't really want to go messing around with it. Hey, maybe another copy of the Iliad comes to light out of some scroll that was burnt by the Vesuvius volcano in Pompeii, and maybe it tells us a totally different story. That would be fantastic. There is actually some interesting work being done on some scrolls at the moment with a very novel and new technology that can somehow with X-rays read these carbonized scrolls. So who knows what comes out of that? And anybody who loves history will be absolutely frothing themselves, wondering what could be next. But until such time, we've got to read history in the light that we have it. Patchy, wholly, inconsistent, incomplete, but it is what it is. We shouldn't be messing with that.
Have you come across anything in your research that you just didn't have an answer for? Whether it was just one thing, maybe a question you still have based on like a past episode that you never got a full conclusion on because there is no data for it.
Oh, Robbie, hundreds of things. I think everybody that's got a passion for history, there's a lot of references. I'll take Plutarch's a really good example. He wrote a series of parallel lives, comparing ancient Greeks with ancient Romans. See, Plutarch was a Greek or a Romanized Greek, and he lived within the Greek, or the Roman province that was Achaia, Greece. And he was trying to. They call him a moralizing biographer. He was trying to write a book as a way of saying, okay, guys, look, your time has come and gone. The Romans are here now, but you really aren't that so different. So he compared the lives of, relatively contemporary Romans with historical Greeks. He did one of Leonidas. Unfortunately, that life has been lost. Now he, because he was such a good biographer, references hundreds of other authors, and the vast majority of them are lost. I would like to get my hands on some of those ancient texts that have been lost, the ones that tantalize you, that say, oh, I read this lovely passage about Sparta in the 550s in this book, and I took this from it, but you don't hear anything else. Those are the things that eat away at me when I'm up at night, can't sleep, thinking, oh God, I'd love a copy of Theophrastus or something like that. Those are the ones, the questions that I had when I came into the podcast that I didn't have an answer for. I found answers for, and moreover, I've developed a network of people, as you would have with your own exposure to the JFK experts, that if you've got a question, you can just reach out to these guys, and they'll give you the best educated answer that you can get. So there's nothing really that I'm missing. My own biases would lead me to believe certain things about the Spartans that others wouldn't. But God Almighty, I would love to get my hands on some of those ancient texts that are missing now, or a complete catalogue of all the books that were within the Library of Alexandria, and start peeling through those. And most people who are truly passionate about history would feel exactly the same way.
Do your sources from the start of your show compared to where you're at now, or do they remain the same? Do you still use the same sources, or did you find other areas that you would feel are more accurate in depictions?
I think as I've gotten more competent with the whole genre of it, history's been a lifelong passion of mine from my earliest age. I've always been into fantasy, into things that happened a very, very long time ago. I've loved history from the.
I can tell you every Greek god, but I don't know much about Sparta.
Yeah, I'll just look. I did the Spartans because the Romans were taken, and I love Sparta. I lived in Sparta, for a period of time. So I've always had a passion there, and nobody had really done the
What do you
Spartan
mean
history. So
the
I thought I'd just
Romans are taken?
oh, there's been some fantastic podcasts. Mike Duncan is one that if you've never listened to his podcast on Rome, like once you listen to Duncan, you're like, well, fuck, there's no point in doing that again.
There's
And
like
look, other people are doing
50
it.
JFK podcasts, and Rob Reiner on his 4th episode said he named all the names involved in it. I'm like, good job, Rob Reiner. You fucking solved it.
Oh, piss off, Rob Reiner. Nobody likes that guy anyway. He's a cuck. But as I've gotten more comfortable with I guess the source itself and with the topic, I've definitely started broadening my intake of history, getting into more of the I guess the epic poetry, more of the odes, just trying to build a better picture of what life would have been like for the ancient Greeks back then, rather than just solely focusing on the corpus of works that sort of concerns itself with the Spartan people. I've definitely broadened my horizons, and I'm far more well read, even to the extent of reading Roman authors who would write about Greek history, like Livy, for example, and people like that who write in that sort of that epic historical genre and reference episodes like Troy. I've expanded my horizons in that regard, so I'm not sort of solely just stuck on this the 3 or 4 good sources we have about Sparta. I'm a little bit more well-rounded in my Greek history than I was 5-6 years ago when I started the show.
What happens when you reach the final conclusion to your podcast? Do you have any ideas of what you're going to end up doing next? Are you going to stay around the same Spartan thing? You could start, I mean, you have so much information soaked up into your head on that already. I would consider you a historian, at least in my eyes. I think a lot of people probably would, because you have soaked up all the information. But what, a blog, anything? Are you going to switch top? You want to hop in the JFK with me? I need your help. Come on.
Hey, always happy to be on Out of the Blank. I have considered it, and I thought I might do I haven't come up with a working title for it yet, but I think the like the Polis podcast or something like that along those lines, where I do a deep dive over 4 or 5 episodes into different Greek polises. So like do Corinth, do Thebes, Athens is pretty well done, but do segments of Athens. Get into cities that people really don't know much about or really haven't heard a lot about, and try to flesh those out the way I've done the Spartans, because you could really do a decent job on Spartan history in 4 or 5 episodes. You could tick it all off, whereas I've just Argos, yeah, for sure, absolutely. Argos would have to be one. I mean, they were massive antagonists of the Spartans. Yeah, I mean, Perseus was Argive. Hercules was born in Argos. Yeah, I will. Yeah, Argos would definitely. I think that's probably where I'll go. I like the idea of deep diving into something. Anybody who's listened to my show, you've had the pleasure or the ostensible pleasure of listening to me rattle on about the Spartans for God knows how many hours now. Like, I don't like to leave stones unturned. I really like getting into the details. So I'd like to do that with some of the topics that haven't been covered. I'm not really interested in doing something that's been done before. I don't know. I have a feeling I can't do a better job than what's already out there, but I'd like to be able to touch things that haven't really been investigated fully. That's probably where I'll go next.
Have you found a nugget in that little shit pile? When I mean shit pile, I just mean history as a shit pile. But have you found a little nugget in there that was something like that was just interesting information, but it could not really benefit talking about it, or it's just something you stumbled across? For instance, I'll give you an example, because I like this example and it's very good. So if you know a lot about Nixon, when you dive into the JFK subject, you end up leading into Watergate, just because that's when you see a lot of the most corruption from our government really get exposed. The Church Committee, where you can look it up, anybody can look it up online. They're in a court proceeding. The director of the CIA slides across the table to Frank Church, who's leading this committee, and it's a heart attack gun. It's a gun the guy holds up. It has a giant scope on the top of it. You can watch the video. He goes, "What does this do?" The guy said within 24 hours, a dart can come out of the gun within 24 hours. Someone will go into cardiac arrest. One of the ways they were attempting to get rid of foreign leaders is with a heart attack gun. That sounds conspiracy until you watch the video, you see the documentation on it. Crazy. But it's this thing with Nixon that I found out, because a lot of people, if you believe the mob killed Kennedy, there is a loan that was loaned out by Carlos Marcello, who was the Chicago mob boss, and he loaned $25,000 to Kennedy's campaign. You're like, why is a mob guy funding JFK and his campaign against Richard Nixon. Well, there's three different theories. One is that is because Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger, sold a lot of moonshine and things of that sort, and worked with the mob for a brief amount of time. The other one is the transcript between Carlos Marcello and Johnny Rosselli, Handsome Johnny, who ended up being chopped up in a barrel. When he on his third time before he testified before the committee about the JFK assassination, which is interesting in itself. But so they had a phone wiretap conversation that the FBI has, and you can look up this transcript for it. They were talking about Frank Sinatra because Carlos Marcello had used Frank Sinatra, given him $25,000 to go for Kennedy's campaign. And this is where the Rat Pack comes in. Frank Sinatra made a song for Kennedy, but it was never attributed to him. But Frank Sinatra has a unique voice. You can't mistake anybody else. That's definitely 100% Frank Sinatra singing. Go for Jack. Jack's the way to go. And that's talking about Jack Kennedy. It was for his election. It played at the tracks and everything like that. There's photos of Frank Sinatra and John F. Kennedy. But this $25,000 has been like, it was given, but Frank Sinatra, did he do it? Was it because of Joe Kennedy's old relationship with the mob? Was it something of that sort? One thing I found out was that election between Nixon, Jimmy Hoffa had taken money out of the Teamsters Union.
Jimmy Hoffa.
And Jimmy Hoffa had given money to Richard Nixon in the total of $40,000. And they think that since $25,000 went to Kennedy from Carlos Marcello, Jimmy Hoffa gave money to Nixon. Jimmy Hoffa was like, what the fuck? You just canceled out my 40,000. Now I only, 15,000? That's all went to Nixon. It was supposed to be 40,000. They didn't communicate on that front. But it leads into this weird area where a billionaire, you might know the name of him, Howard Hughes. You ever heard of that?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Actor. Well, when he was buying up, he built a lot of Las Vegas. He bought it from, a mob was really built up Las Vegas, but he bought out all the old mobsters like Mickey Cohen, all these guys. He phased them out and took over their casinos. Well, Howard Hughes donated to Nixon's campaign through his brother. And I didn't know this. And this is the tidbit I was talking about where you start diving, you start seeing the connections. Nixon, I think his name's Donald Nixon. He started a burger chain called the Nixon Burger. And dude, this is the most interesting thing. So he gave money to Nixon through Nixon's brother. So Nixon, you can look up these photos. There's photos of him standing at the Nixon restaurant with all these other, right-wing people. And he's standing in front of a banner, and the banner is in a language you can't read. It's like Vietnamese or it's something else. And they thought it was hilarious because they're making fun of communism. So they took a picture in front of it. And if you read what that is transcribed, the banner is, and he didn't know about this when he was taking pictures in front of it, it said, ask him about the loan. And then at the end of the dinner at the Nixon restaurant, the Nixon Burger was like this big thing. My brother's, Richard Nixon, try the Nixon Burger. It was this huge, like weird campaign when Nixon was president and everything. But when they started serving fortune cookies, now here's the crazy thing. They're all making fun of it because they're going, fortune cookies, this is ridiculous. Making fun of communism, that type of thing. They're just having a good laugh about it. Well, everyone started opening up the fortune cookies and the fortune read, ask him about the loan. And that's when it led back to find out that Howard Hughes had donated all this money to Richard Nixon's brother. And it was just so interesting to me. Like, we don't talk about that, these scandals that start happening. You see all these transactions, and the mob was just somehow really into politics. I mean, one of my favorite photos is Jimmy Hoffa at the end of the table like this. He's itching his eye with his middle finger. It's because Robert Kennedy has his ass in court and he's lighting them up. And, Jimmy Hoffa's not taking it seriously because you got to remember, Jimmy Hoffa might be a mobster, but he's the leader of the Teamsters Union. And that's where history loses out information, because the fact that he's a mobster and a bad guy, you can't support him. But he really revolutionized the Teamsters. He got money for those truckers. He really helped those people out. He really did something. And that's, like I said, in the eyes of society today, oh, you're supporting a mob guy? It's like, well, damn, he was effective at helping out the working class American that wasn't getting shit from the government. So to me, sorry, that was a long rant, but it's interesting information that I found out just by digging into the Kennedy stuff. Even though the mob, I don't think they did it, and people will give you shit if you even mention any of this stuff. But if you go into those connections, the power that they had, influence into movies, influence into so much relationships with, government officials and figures like that. I mean, they had dirt on Hoover dressed up in a dress, which isn't bad now, but the only issue, I've seen the photo. I can show you that. It's pretty interesting.
Please do. I didn't know that to this extent. Great.
There's a weird, kind of, everyone always wondered why Hoover never acknowledged the mob. The official kind of thing that came out after these mafia people started meeting and having like these giant conglomerations, and really when John Dillinger was killed, um, is when Hoover really had to step in and say, "Hey, the mob's real; it does exist, but I believe it's a state problem. That's why I never chose to acknowledge it before." But for the longest time, he denied even their existence. But two possible theories. One, the mob had control over Hoover because they had photos of him in a dress. I've seen the photos. That's a possible theory. I mean, there's a weird thing with the FBI. If anybody talked trash on Hoover, the FBI went after you. They went through your mail. They did a bunch of stuff to really scare you from messing with their director because Hoover was the say all. But Clyde Tolson, his close assistant, I mean, when they're older, up in like their 70s, they were going to each other's houses. They were going to dinners together. There's very photos you can find online of them holding hands. You don't know what that is, whether they're close friends or not. But he's the only person throughout the whole FBI that ever got a 100% performance rating from J. Edgar Hoover. So that is a weird, like little, like you can try and connect the dots. And Jack Anderson, a reporter at the time, was stalking Hoover, digging through his mail and everything. And really, I mean, it's in such detail about how he describes these guys. And the person in the dress photo of Hoover is Clyde Tolson beside him. So I don't think they had photo manipulating skills back then. Maybe, possibly. But then the other theory is that Hoover liked to go to the track, and the mob owned the track. So a lot of mob figures admitted to hooking up Hoover, or hooking Hoover up with race bets. You know, they would rig races for him. So that's a more less conspiracy, less kind of into the homosexuality thing. The only issue with that is that Hoover was a hypocrite. He went after gay people. If he was gay himself, he's a piece of shit because, in my opinion, I don't care if you're gay, you're just a hypocrite.
It's common, but too, that, you know, like people that are kind of in the closet, you know, they act out like that, you know, they express homophobia. So you're starting to see it. You've got this JFK as the assassination's the spider at the center of the web, and you've done that much digging that you can just see this elaborate pattern, you know, all the way around him. It's like that with anything to get into. It all starts making sense. I mean, everything you said to me then I've never really heard before, but I can tell that, you know, you're convicted on it. You know, you've got all the information. You're in the detail. You live your life in that zone, and you start seeing tangents absolutely everywhere. Stuff that a casual observer would just have either no time for or no understanding of.
It's like if you know historically, you know what COINTELPRO is?
No.
So COINTELPRO was an FBI operation, and we talked about this off air about Oswald, but COINTELPRO is basically the government's way of radicalizing groups that they would consider threats. The FBI considered groups potentially threats, and they would steer them up and make them attack each other. Basically, they did it to the Black Panthers, and that's how history teaches them. It was against the Black Panther Party. Well, if you read their official documentation, the list that they have there, it's the KKK, it's the Black Panthers, it's any group that the government saw as a threat to their way of thinking. So it's not necessarily just a racist thing, it's an overall deep state kind of issue, but it's taught as it's against the Black Panthers. Now, there is a lot of evidence to support that they really were only focused on Black Panthers, but they also, I mean, Fair Play for Cuba Committee was communists, and Oswald handing out leaflets in an area that is largely right wing where there's no Fair Play for Cuba chapter at all. He was trying to start one in the most hardcore right wing place possible. Is that sheep dipping? I mean, when he gets arrested, he goes to the headquarters, the police headquarters in New Orleans, and he asks to see an FBI agent. What the fuck is that? Like, so there's these like weird things about history that aren't being taught to the full extent because it doesn't fit the political bias of the people who are telling you that information in the first place. And that's like back to my original question. When you're searching through everything and you come across the nuggets, what's a nugget for you? What's one of those little interesting deets?
That was a very roundabout way of asking the
fucking thing around.
Wow, you came back to it. That's impressive, hey, mate. You need to get into whipping and lassoing thing. You could rope just about anything in with that. Look, the first thing that comes to mind, because you're just so heavily invested in the JFK assassination. Well, there's a conspiracy of assassination at the very heart of the Spartan kingship, and it involved it's very misunderstood. It's on the periphery of the information. It's one of those things that, you know, you can be read 1,000 different ways, but I love this story. So Pausanias, the regent Pausanias, who became regent of the Archaeid throne in the lieu of Leonidas's murder at Thermopylae. So he, won a phenomenal victory at Plataea, leading the the allied Greek army. And afterwards, he took land forces into Persia and started, fighting battles over there, liberating cities. And there was a thought at the time that he was looking to become sole king. The other king that was on the throne, the co-throne, the Eurypontid throne, was a bit of a weak king, and Pausanias was never going to be king. Leonidas' son was destined for that role. So the thought was within Sparta, while this guy is off in Persia, with his own army, he's going to become a self-made man. He's going to return to Sparta with a powerful army and basically abolish the dual kingship and install himself as king. So they sent off an E4 as an envoy to bring him back to Sparta. Now, it would stand to reason, if they had him dead to rights, why would he come back to Greece? He could have done what so many other Greeks had done throughout history and gone to Susa or Persepolis or wherever the Persian king found himself at that time and bent the knee and lived out his days in luxury. So many ancient Greeks went down that very path if they, for whatever reason, they were ostracized from Greece itself. So he could have done that, but no, as what I believe, a loyal Spartan, he returned to Sparta and to answer the charges. Now, it's a bit ambiguous what happened to him after that, but it seems that he left Sparta once again, not far, maybe 30, 40 kilometers north, and they say that he was trying to raise another army in Arcadia. And when this didn't work, he returned to Sparta again. When he came back, it was said that he had completely lost his mind. And the phrase in Greek was that he was taking his wine neat. So the Greek wine was very strong. And there was always, whenever you had a symposium, a party with the wine, the most important job was the person who mixed the wine with water, sometimes 10 parts, sometimes 20 parts water to 1 part wine, because the wine was so incredibly strong. So if you drank your wine neat, as in drank it without water, it was said to send you insane. So that's what they said about Pausanias. He was drinking his wine neat. He was trying to become the sole king. And they ended up walling him. So he took sanctuary when he came back to Sparta within one of the temple's sanctuaries. And the Greeks would never defile the sanctuary by committing murder in there. So they thought, what we'll do instead is we'll wall up the door to the temple. So that way we don't actually kill him. We'll just starve him to death, and therefore we won't have to worry about the pollution of murder in a holy sanctuary. But the story goes on to say that even though he'd lost his mind, he hadn't lost his powers of persuasion, and he managed to convince a Helot slave to give him a knife. And the next day they found him, he'd sliced himself up to 1,000,000 pieces and bled out. And that was the story that they ran with. And I find that story and that chain of events to be, one, very confusing and almost downright disbelievable. I think that, the Spartan powers that be didn't like Pausanias, didn't like the amount of personal prestige that he was bringing onto himself through his victory at Plataea, and he wasn't of the royal line, wasn't destined to inherit. I think that they offed him in much the same way that the government maybe offed JFK through conspiracy. I think a conspiracy was formed, and they killed Pausanias, and then they wrote it off as he'd lost his mind and sliced himself up and killed himself. That's one of the little tidbits that I've always been very, very interested in. Would love to know exactly what happened to Pausanias.
Jesus. God's watching. It doesn't matter what you do. God's watching. It's whether you want to blend the details, build up a wall. It doesn't matter. Somebody's watching you down there. God damn.
Yeah.
That's rough. All right. Well, look, Steve, you give me enough of your time there, brother man. We're going to end on the murder. Where can
good place to end.
Yeah. Where can people find your links, man?
Where you'll find any good podcast, you'll also find the humble Spartan History Podcast. Just Google Spartan History Podcast. I'm on Twitter at Spartan History or Facebook at Spartan History Podcast. Reach out, say good day.
I'm going to link all that in the description. It's been a pleasure chatting. Thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank. Stay tuned for next episode.